Cannock Chase, set in the heart of England, one of Europe's last remaining areas of natural heathland and a place designated by the British government as an area of outstanding natural beauty. Cannock Chase, although never far from urban development, is famous for its dramatic landscape and its diversity of plant and wildlife. But Cannock Chase has been in the media for more controversial reasons. It is in fact known as a UFO hotspot. Now, if you think UFOs are a load of baloney, then you're probably grabbing for the remote control as I speak. But, however, if you've been losing sleep because you don't want to be abducted again, or if you've seen something that you can't possibly in your wildest imagination explain, or if you're one of the witnesses to the many sightings near here, then you might want to listen on. You see, Cannock Chase has a bit of a reputation for things extraterrestrial. For example, in a report called Crash Retrievals by Leonard Stringfield, a US naval officer, it is suggested that an object crash-landed on the chase near to the town of Penkridge. An investigation on behalf of Staffordshire UFO Group identified witnesses who reported something large being loaded onto what was then called a Queen Mary, a certain type of truck used by the RAF at the time. Photographs were taken, but duly seized by the police and have, of course, since disappeared. Will we ever know what it was? There was also a cigar-shaped object photographed from a civilian airliner in the 1960s as it flew over the Cannock Chase area. But the event doesn't end there. Cannock Chase became the centre of attention again in the 1980s, with many UFO sightings in the Staffordshire skies. This event became known as the Staffordshire Flap. However, we'll start with a specific sighting of May 1988, which raises a lot of questions about the UFO phenomena. It was witnessed by a large number of people on a clear, starlit night in late spring. It was a major story in the local press and discussed in letters to the papers and featured in many articles. Well, it was so significant to one particular person that he now runs the Staffordshire UFO Group.
Well, we were having a family barbecue that evening. It had been a very, very warm day, 16th of May. My brother, who's 20 years younger than me, at that time saw two bright lights above the Cannock Chase. So one by one we joined him to watch these two lights travelling across the Cannock Chase horizontally, but doing a few funny things really, going over the top of one another. So it sort of stood out, and they were quite bright. They travelled along to the area of Stafford and then did a U-turn, so then basically they were coming back towards us. As they got nearer and nearer, I asked if anybody had got a camera. My mother went into the house, came out with a camera, but no film in it. And then we watched, amazingly, 2 triangular-shaped objects go over the top of us silently, all lit up like 2 Christmas trees, basically. 3 very bright white lights on each of the corners, and several other lights underneath, which, again, you couldn't discern a colour. It could have been bluish-white, but no familiar sort of red and green lights that you get with air traffic, really, aeroplanes.
Elaine Willisey was one of the many who also witnessed the event.
I was standing having a gossip to my next door neighbour in Harrowby Street. It was roughly about 10 o'clock at night, and we were both startled by an object flying overhead. We actually stood and watched this object for 10-15 minutes, and what amazed us was A, the size of it and the shape of it and the number of lights actually on it. And we both said, that's not an aeroplane. We actually watched it hover, and it almost turned, not a full circle, but it seemed to go back the way that it came. If I think back, it was probably like a triangular shape, more that I can think of, and it was full of red and white lights. No sound, just a lot of lights, and very awesome in the sky. And we stood easily 10 minutes watching, and then it just went away. And we said, no, it can't possibly be an aeroplane. We discussed it, and we said, that is not an aeroplane. It's too large, it's too quiet, no noise coming from it. And it just seemed to glide across the sky. The next morning, I obviously wasn't the only one that had seen this object, and I rang the newsletter and said that I'd also seen it, and somebody came out and interviewed me, and I told them what I'd seen. Everybody in work thought I was stupid, but I wasn't. I knew what I'd seen, and it was almost as though you could have pulled down and reached it out of the sky. That's how low it was.
The same descriptions of whatever it was that flew over the chase came thick and fast in the local press. They all described the same shapes, triangles covered in lights. But not everybody thought that what they saw that night was possibly extraterrestrial. Mr. Teasdale, also an eyewitness, was driving close to the chase when he saw an array of lights in the night sky.
Well, I well remember that it was a fantastic night. I can't remember one that was so clear. And we were just motoring back from Burton-on-Trent to Stafford, where I live, and we came over Blissfield Reservoir, and at the top of the hill there was a panorama looking right across Cannock Chase, Rugeley all lit up, power station, and there was a myriad of stars. And then suddenly I looked up and saw among the stars a complete collection of lights, which I couldn't identify immediately. I couldn't understand what they were. I didn't know how far away they were or how high they were. But we continued on down to the bottom of the hill, much nearer to Rugeley, and pulled up at the side of the road and watched them. I suppose I watched them for 15 minutes or so, and they were heading from east, or slightly south of east, to slightly north of west, and then they appeared to turn when they got to the north-west end of Cannock Chase, over Milford area, towards Stafford, and they came back the way that they'd previously tracked. Unfortunately for me and my wife, they moved straight overhead, and I got my binoculars with me. I always carry binoculars, and as they came over the top, I caught sight of what appeared to be the engines of a VC-10, and immediately that put the whole thing into perspective. The lights were obviously right along the wings. There must have been a dozen or more, possibly on each aircraft, because there were two, and that solved the mystery for me. It didn't obviously solve it for a lot of people, and there was a lot of discussion about it afterwards, but I didn't think any more of it from that moment onwards. But it certainly was a big mystery until I happened to be fortunate enough to see parts of the aircraft. That was the odd thing about it. The number of lights that you could see with the naked eye created almost sort of triangular pattern, or possibly two, depending on the angle from which they could be seen. But it seemed to me that what was going on was some kind of exercise, possibly experimental, to test the viability of air-to-air refuelling at night. And with that end in view, it was obvious that the aircraft had got an additional number of lights on, which you never normally see on aircraft, which obviously helped to create the impression that they weren't aircraft at all. But that seemed to me was what was going on. And in fact, later on, during discussions or articles in the paper, I wrote to the local Stafford newsletter and said to them what I'd seen and what I thought it was, and I suggested to them that if they contacted RAF Bryce Norton, which is the only airfield where VC-10s were based at that time, that they might confirm that they in fact had aircraft over the Midlands area that night. And the newspaper said they did, and they put it in the paper, and they confirmed that they had had two VC-10s operating that night over the Midlands. That seemed to me to clinch it.
This is the aircraft type that Mr. Teasdale believed he saw a pair of that night. A Vickers VC-10, designed as a civilian airliner in the 60s, like this example here, preserved as a static exhibit at the RAF Museum, Cosford. They were withdrawn from service as a civilian airliner, but a number were converted by the RAF for the air-to-air refuelling role. They first came into military service in 1982, 6 years before Mr. Teasdale's sighting. So, did Mr. Teasdale see two RAF VC-10s on manoeuvres? Certainly the graceful shape of this aircraft, with its sharply swept wings and tail, lends itself to triangular imagery, and if there were lights along the wing, then would that not produce the effect of two triangles flying in close proximity to one another? Mr. Teasdale also says that he caught a glimpse of what he thought was the engine nacelles of the aircraft. Certainly the press reports following Mr. Teasdale's letter suggested that the objects seen that night were nothing more than aircraft mistaken for UFOs. But there are a couple of unanswered questions. Firstly, lights. All aircraft must show navigation lights. These are red for the port wing and green for the starboard. There may also be other lights, but red and green lights should be visible. There are also usually flashing lights. Although Elaine Willisey reported both red and white flashing lights, Graham Allen asserts seeing only continuous lights. The other point is sound. Two VC-10s have 8 jet engines between them, which may well be heard, especially if these aircraft pass almost directly overhead. And of course, these jet engines were designed in the 60s and were considerably more noisy than modern jet engines. Mr. Teasdale reported hearing engine noise momentarily. But there were other aircraft in the air that night. It is, after all, a busy air corridor. But Graham Allen and Elaine Willisey say there was no noise at all from the objects. And there's another couple of points. In Mr. Teasdale's letter, he suggests that the VC-10s may have been carrying out a night refuelling exercise, hence the lights, over the Midlands one of the most built-up and populated areas of Britain. The objects were also seen to turn in formation over Stafford. Again, is it reasonable to assume that two large aircraft would execute a 180-degree turn over a heavily populated area, in formation, at night? The skies over Cannock Chase are also controlled airspace, and therefore air traffic control would have had to have given clearance for these two large aircraft to be there. Bill Cash, then MP for the area, raised the sightings in Parliament. No such information was given in the Commons response from the then Defence Minister Roger Freeman, who said that it was simply busy air traffic into Birmingham Airport. Bill Cash described the reply as ludicrous. None of the official correspondence mentions VC-10s, which still leaves the question, what were they? Even more strange are the events that took place earlier that same day near to the village of Horton, which is located to the northwest of Cannock Chase.
On the 16th of May 1988, I was travelling back from Reading in Berkshire and heading for my home in Nosal, and I always came off at Gailey and through Penkridge and then down the lanes and from the village of Braidley behind us. And I was travelling down the lane from Braidley towards the A518, which is the Newport Road just by Horton. We're coming up to this spot here. There's a bend further on down as I'm travelling along. There's a line of trees here that you can see. And there was two triangular objects in the sky, not too high above the trees, 30 foot above those trees, and with a solid single red light on underneath them, totally black, which looked like military aircraft that I'd never ever seen before. Mm-hmm. The unusual thing to me was that they were totally silent. You got to remember it was a bright, clear, sunny evening, one of the best that I can remember, no wind, and I had my windows down, my sunroof open. I did have my radio on, but I turned my radio down as I saw these things, thinking, oh God, what are they? And they were totally silent, and then carried off together, off to our left-hand side here now, and went out just on the, what would be the eastern side of the village of Horton, heading on down. So I could see them for a good half, 3/4 of a mile in the air until I lost them behind a bank of trees. And these trees that you see here now as well, they've got 12, 14 years of growth on them since the events, and the same with the hedgerow. The only strange thing that I felt, or that my mind mulled over, was that they were silent. Apart from that, the next time I saw those, what I believed to be the same things as I saw in the sky that night, was when they trundled out the stealth bomber out of the hangar that they were going to use in the Gulf War. Mm-hmm.
The thing is, Steve Delaney is convinced he saw a military aircraft, a stealth aircraft, something explicable.
And so is Mr. Teasdale. But what is odd is that the reports both from the daytime and the nighttime sightings describe triangular-shaped objects. Also, Steve Delaney reported a single red light underneath. Again, a common detail when witnesses report triangles as UFOs.
Well, sightings of so-called flying triangles, we're now getting reports that predate any of the explanations that have been put forward by some, that they are all some kind of super secret stealth-like craft. Only recently we uncovered some news clippings from the northeast of England where you have the archetypal description of a huge flying triangle with pinpoints of lights on the corners and a great big red light in the centre underneath from the early 1950s. So, I'm absolutely convinced that the flying triangles, the largest wave before Belgium, incidentally, was in the Hudson Valley in New York State in the early 1970s, where they were referred to as FTs, flying triangles, or boomerangs. If these were really some kind of super secret unconventional stealth-like craft. Given the sheer voluminous amount of sightings of these things throughout the world, there would have to be squadrons of them, literally hundreds, if not thousands, to account for each and every one. So again, some of the reports of these FTs have come from extremely credible witnesses. You mentioned the Belgium UFO flap. Again, the flying triangle seen by a journalist on the Folkestone Herald a few years ago over the country residence of the former Home Secretary Michael Howard MP was typical of the kind of reports that one sees. This thing was described by that journalist as big as a playing field. Now, where we heard that before, in Belgium and elsewhere. But it also went from literally a suspended hovering state to a distant blip on the horizon in a split second. We don't have anything like that.
Nick Pope was the British government's own UFO expert for the Ministry of Defence from 1991 to 1994. He's produced a number of books on the subject and is well regarded as an authority on the UFO phenomenon.
Well, I joined Secretariat Air Staff in 1991, and I had that job for the next 3 years. I started, yes, as a sceptic, but gradually the weight of interesting and potentially significant UFO sightings began to change my mind on this. I think there were a number of specific things that brought this about. One was looking back through the old files at some of the classic cases, like the Rendlesham Forest incident. And the other thing was the significant cases that I came across from day to day. One notable one being from 31st of March 1993, when a UFO flew over 2 military bases, RAF Cosford and RAF Shawbury. That sort of thing, involving structured craft capable of speeds and manoeuvres that we can't match, even with prototype aircraft, changed my mind. Certainly triangular-shaped UFOs do seem to be very much common fare these days, and indeed have been since the late 80s, going back to, for example, the Hudson Valley sightings in America, but also the Belgian sightings from 1990, the British wave from 1993. So this is a popular shape. I think it's a real craft of some sort, but just what or who is operating it, it's still a mystery.
Likewise, Omar Fowler is a renowned author in the field and is well acquainted with the description and light patterns associated with flying triangles.
I've been researching UFOs as such since the mid-60s. The light-in sequence that you spoke of is common with many UFO reports. That is a white, yellowy light just inset slightly from each corner with a large red light in the centre. It's also been noted that when the craft starts to increase its speed, the red light dims and the corner lights change colour. The Belgian Air Force took a great interest in flying triangles and in fact worked very closely with SOBEPS, that is the Belgium UFO group, in locating the craft over the country and sending off F-16 fighters to chase them or to intercept them. From the UK point of view, we know that the British military have at least attempted to intercept flying triangles, but as far as admitting publicly that this is all going on, the ministry is pretty silent on the subject.
So, where do we go from here?
One of the problems with UFO triangle sightings is the fact that there is very little clear recorded video or photographic evidence, apart of course from the Belgian incident in 1990. This footage is claimed to be a UFO triangle, but could it just be an aircraft? There is, however, something unusual about its flight path. We can see strong flashing lights and a triangular pattern. The original soundtrack is running, but there is no aircraft or helicopter sound. We can see the object moving behind trees from right to left. But watch. the object stops in mid-flight or turns very sharply and returns left to right. So what is it? The next example was filmed in the city of Wolverhampton, about 10 miles directly south of Cannock Chase. Again, the original soundtrack is running.
It's disappearing. It could be a plane.
No, wait, what the... I got it. Is that it? No, wait, is that a plane?
Because it's got flashing top and bottom.
Yeah. I've got it perfect now.
It's going round.
What the fuck is it? It's like...
That is not an aeroplane.
It's going like that, isn't it, now? Is that what you mean? It's going round
it's
like
going,
that?
Yeah, like round.
I've got it on video now.
What the fuck is it?
What could that be?
What is it? It's not a helicopter or anything like that.
No. You'd hear it.
Despite the hilarity in the background, it seems possible that you could hear a helicopter or jet engine or aircraft piston engine, and, of course, the object is stationary. This is a still frame which was taken from a video recorded near to the village of Yoxall, just to the east of Cannock Chase. The lights at the bottom of the picture are from the town of Rugeley, and at the top there is a clear triangular set of lights. The original footage is still being sought. An amazing personal encounter with a flying triangle is recounted by Larry Warren, the key witness to the Rendlesham Forest incident. He took a photograph of the object.
So I turned around, and sure enough, this thing was there, and it was over the house. It was 200 feet in the air at the most. I was stunned, because what you could see was that it was triangular, definitely. You could see its superstructure, its welds, what looked like welds, how it was put together. It was very mismatched, pieces of steel or dull metal put together. It had 3 points of light on it. You could see its undercarriage very clearly, and there were devices coming off it, like bubbles or domes. There were 3 points of white light, one in the front, two in the back. There was no red light like you hear about in so many of the cases in the middle that I recall. No sound, no engine noise, no generator sound, no humming, no nothing. It just was there. And I knew that I knew there was something bizarre, and it had been playing games for hours. There was no doubt. Or it had locked on, it knew someone knew. And the back two lights were flashing together, just like that. The front light was steady. It was just on. It was very dull white. So I walked up to it. You know, you're intimidated of something this size in the air. It was not built by any government on Earth. That's bullshit. There's no, excuse my language, there's no way. It was, there it was. You could see its structure very clearly because it was a cloudy night, and it was very kind of a light kind of night. It wasn't that dark. It was summer. And what impressed me the most was how badly put together it looked like. It looked like, you know, well, we'll throw this on it, we'll throw that. On the front of it, you could see it had a yellow, gigantic window with a cross, beams like a cross on it. And you could see that lit up from the front. It was maybe back to us and then moved a little bit, very slow. I got under its, what would have been, it's facing that way to me, you know, the point's going that way. And I walked under its wing. And that was a bit intimidating because you could feel energy from it. You could definitely feel a static or something pulling you almost off the ground. Ever so slightly. Well, I had an Olympus camera with me, and it had a no zoom, 200 speed Kodak film at the time. I have the negatives still. I had only taken 2 shots in New Orleans. At the end of a roll, I started a new roll. Took 2 shots, we came back. So I started to say, I'm going to take pictures of you, SOB. And I was swearing at it. I was like, oh, this is too good to be true. And it was alien. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't know what part of alien it comes from, a dimension, a planet, who cares? It wasn't from Detroit, and that's the bottom line. So I aimed the camera up, and I said, I'm going to get you. And I took 1 shot. No flash. I didn't use the flash because I didn't want to scare it or threaten it or whatever. You just are intimidated. then it started to move, and I could walk with it. So I'll tell you, it was moving, point forward, over the houses. No one else came out, nothing. And I swear we were yelling, but it was like a vacuum. Everything, you were kind of sucked into this kind of vacuum. That's all I can describe. It's typical with this stuff. And I walked under it, and I swear I didn't walk any more than 3 miles an hour. I was just pacing with it. And I said, I'm going to take another shot, because at this point, there's, excuse me, a symbol, a panel, a strip of symbols with amber light in this foreign language. And I've drawn what it was, and because of bent waters and all that, this is the first time I'm really sharing this, except with friends and people who went through it. But I saw it, this symbol under it, all lit up, and it was very long. It was about 16, 20 feet long of this panel with, looked like writing, the typical, it looked like hieroglyphics, but it wasn't, or Chinese symbols, but it wasn't. And it was kind of somewhat lit. Now, next to that, just at the end of it, was this dome thing that kind of stuck out from a structure I couldn't tell at a really sharp angle. And there was a light on inside that, like would have been in the front, this yellowish light. And this thing walked into that, and it literally walked into it, and I could see it. And it was a person or a being or something. And I just couldn't believe it. And I said, well, clearly, it knows I'm looking at it. And I went specifically to take a picture of that thing in the bubble or in the window on the underside of this object. And that was the second picture I took. And as I took it, the camera seemed to wind down immediately. It was only 4 pictures into the roll of 24, and then rewound and shut down instantly. I couldn't function it, use it again at all. And it was fine after that. The problem is, this thing went over me. Clearly, I saw the being in the glass thing. It was hard to describe. It wasn't us. It was definitely scary, that part of it. And it had what looked like a hat. And I took a picture of it. And that's the sequence of pictures I've given to you folks.
This is one of the photographs Larry took. And this is the other. They are nothing like his description of what he saw, and remain as much a puzzle to Larry as anyone else. These are the 2 photographs taken before. Perfectly normal. However, if we look more closely, we can just make out something behind all the lights. And closer still? What's this? Could it be superstructure? A dome? A figure? So, if photographs and video footage aren't that conclusive, how about documents? Staffordshire UFO Group managed to acquire these documents, which refer to sightings of UFOs near to Staffordshire. The Ministry of Defence know them as signals. So what's significant about them? Well, first of all, these are not top-secret documents. You can see they're unclassified and so available to the public, which of course does not suggest that the Ministry of Defence is completely helpful when it comes to the issue of UFOs. In this letter to the Staffordshire UFO Group, Lord Hill Norton, former Defence Chief and Admiral of the Fleet, writes, "The MOD, ministers and officials alike are all programmed to rubbish any document, tape, photo, or verbal report which mentions the word UFO. You will get no help, no change, and frequently not an acknowledgement from any of them." However, we have these documents. They show 2 reports of UFOs. Both reports are dated the 16th of May 1988, one at 9:30 p.m. and the other at 9:45 p.m. They show sightings in Ludlow, Shropshire, and Bromsgrove in Warwickshire, south of Staffordshire. One reports an umbrella-shaped object, while the other describes 2 fan-shaped objects. The main sightings over Cannock Chase were at about 10 p.m. that same evening. The interesting thing about these documents isn't so much the sightings as the distribution list. The list of recipients include ground early warning radar, scientific and technical intelligence, defence intelligence, and the Secretariat to Air Staff. In short, the event is significant. These departments would not have received reports of busy air traffic. If we add 2 other documents, we can reach a number of conclusions. These are reports from the Air Traffic Control Civil Watch Supervisor. From Birmingham Airport, it seems very likely. They show reports from Wombourne and Cannock Police of 2 separate sightings in the South Staffordshire area, both on the 16th of May at near 10 p.m, the time when the objects were sighted by Graham Allen, Elaine Willisey, Mr. Teasdale, and all the people who wrote in to the local press. The fact that the report comes from Air Traffic Control Civil Watch Supervisor indicates that the reports are taken seriously. Likewise, the date stamps on the MOD documents indicate an immediate response. We conclude, therefore, that this event, witnessed by a large number of people, including the police, and the involvement of the local MP Bill Cash, was significant, and that the explanations given are not helpful. There are no more documents available, which begs another question. Why?
We have to respond to these charges that there is no such thing as a UFO cover-up with the facts. And when you examine the facts, which is what I do and which is what people at Staffordshire UFO Group do, we can then, demonstrably convince people, ordinary people, that there is something to the notion that there is a UFO cover-up. I mean, I could talk all day about cover-ups and cite this case, that file, this statement, this press story, these documents. Yes, there's a cover-up going on. And then we could talk probably for a week about the reasons why that cover-up is going on.
The events of the 16th of May 1988 will remain with the people who witnessed them as long as they live. The explanations given by the authorities were either wholly inadequate or don't really stand up to reason. Which brings us back to where we started. What were those objects that flew over here and caused so much attention that night? Will we ever know exactly what they were? It seems unlikely.
All that we've hoped to achieve with this documentary is to give the issue a public airing and hope that the interest and questions will continue. It is, of course, only one of a number of events in this area, a place rich in interest for those investigating the UFO phenomenon. The truth is here, and it isn't going to go away.